first time I laid eyes on Mr. Johnson, our new neighbor, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. It wasn't just the way he stared at me with those piercing eyes, or the way he moved with an unsettling grace. It was something deeper, something that sent a shiver down my spine. My suspicions only grew stronger as the days passed and strange occurrences began to plague our quiet suburban neighborhood. It started with the dead animals, the birds and squirrels that littered our lawns, their lifeless bodies twisted and contorted in unnatural poses. At first, we chalked it up to a stray cat or a neighborhood dog gone rogue, but as the body count rose, we couldn't ignore the sinister pattern that emerged. Then there were the scratch marks, deep gouges that marred the doors and windows of several houses on our block. They appeared overnight, as if some unseen force had raked its claws across the wood, leaving behind a trail of terror in its wake. No one could explain where they came from or what had caused them, but the fear that gripped our community was palpable. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of all was the eerie activities that seemed to plague the houses of our neighbors. Things would go missing without a trace: keys, wallets, even entire pieces of furniture, only to reappear days later in the most unlikely of places. And then there were the shreds of paper, fragments torn from books, letters, and photographs, scattered like confetti across our lawns, a silent testament to the unseen presence that lurked in the shadows. Through it all, Mr. Johnson remained a silent and mysterious figure, his dark silhouette looming in the windows of his house like a specter of doom. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow connected to the strange occurrences that plagued our neighborhood, but I had no proof, no evidence to support my suspicions. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me whenever I passed by his house, the sense that something sinister lurked behind those closed doors. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, that sense of dread only grew stronger, until it felt as though the very air around us was thick with malevolent intent. But despite my growing unease, life in our neighborhood went on as usual. We went about our daily routines, exchanging polite nods and greetings with our neighbors as if nothing were amiss. But beneath the surface, a sense of unease hung heavy in the air, a silent reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond our doorstep. And then, one fateful night, everything changed. It started with a scream, a piercing cry that shattered the silence of the night and sent chills down our spines. We rushed outside to find Mrs. Thompson, our elderly neighbor from across the street, standing on her porch, her face pale with terror. "It's him," she gasped, her voice trembling with fear. "It's Mr. Johnson. He's in my house." Without hesitation, we sprang into action, racing across the street to Mrs. Thompson's house. As we burst through the door, we were met with a scene of chaos and horror. Furniture overturned, belongings strewn about, and Mrs. Thompson huddled in the corner, her eyes wide with fear. "He came out of nowhere," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the pounding of my heart. "I don't know how he got in. I thought I was going to die." But as we searched the house, there was no sign of Mr. Johnson. He had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the lingering scent of fear and the unsettling feeling that we were being watched. As we comforted Mrs. Thompson and tried to make sense of what had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that whatever darkness had taken hold of our neighborhood was far from finished with us. And as I cast a wary glance toward Mr. Johnson's house, I knew that the true horror had only just begun. As days turned into weeks, the sense of unease among the residents of the neighborhood only intensified. The mysterious occurrences continued unabated, each new incident adding to the growing sense of dread that hung heavy in the air. For Sarah, the scratching at her door had become a nightly ritual, a haunting reminder of the unseen presence lurking just beyond her threshold. She had tried everything to ward off the mysterious intruder: locks, alarms, even salt lines. but nothing seemed to deter it. And then there were the other strange happenings, the missing items, the shredded papers, all seemingly connected in some inexplicable way. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching her every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But as the days passed, Sarah began to notice a pattern emerging, a pattern that seemed to lead straight to the doorstep of her neighbor, Mr. Johnson. She had always found him to be a bit odd, but now his eccentricities took on a more sinister tone. She watched him from her window as he went about his daily routines, his movements slow and deliberate, his gaze lingering on her house for just a moment too long. There was something about the way he carried himself, something about the look in his eyes that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah began to investigate further, scouring the neighborhood for clues and talking to other residents who had experienced similar strange occurrences. What she discovered sent a chill down her spine. It seemed that Mr. Johnson was at the center of it all, a shadowy figure lurking in the shadows, his presence casting a pall over the entire neighborhood. But why? What did he want, and what was he hiding? As Sarah delved deeper into the mystery, she uncovered a tangled web of secrets and lies that threatened to unravel everything she thought she knew about her seemingly idyllic neighborhood. Dead animals, scratch marks on doors, eerie activities. It all pointed to Mr. Johnson. But why? With each new revelation, Sarah's fear turned to anger, her determination to uncover the truth fueling her every move. She refused to be a victim, refused to let Mr. Johnson's sinister machinations go unchecked. But as she delved deeper into the darkness that lurked within her neighborhood, Sarah began to realize that the truth was far more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. And with Mr. Johnson's watchful eye fixed firmly upon her, she knew that she was running out of time to uncover the secrets that lay hidden just beyond her doorstep. The air was thick with tension as Sarah stood outside Mr. Johnson's house, her heart pounding in her chest with a mixture of fear and determination. She had uncovered the truth, or at least part of it, and now it was time to confront the source of the terror that had gripped her neighborhood for far too long. With a deep breath to steady her nerves, Sarah reached out and knocked on Mr. Johnson's door, her knuckles rapping against the wood with a hollow echo. For a moment, there was no response, and Sarah feared that she had come too late, that Mr. Johnson had sensed her presence and fled into the darkness. But then, to her surprise, the door creaked open slowly, revealing the dimly lit interior of Mr. Johnson's house. With a sense of trepidation, Sarah stepped inside, the musty scent of decay assaulting her senses as she crossed the threshold. The house was a labyrinth of shadows and secrets, its walls lined with faded wallpaper and dusty knickknacks that seemed to watch her every move with silent reproach. Sarah shivered, her skin prickling with unease as she made her way deeper into the darkness. And then, just as she was about to turn back, she saw it, a flicker of movement in the corner of her eye, a shadowy figure lurking in the shadows. With a surge of adrenaline, Sarah rushed forward, her heart pounding in her chest as she prepared to confront her mysterious adversary once and for all. But as she rounded the corner, her breath caught in her throat as she came face to face with Mr. Johnson, or what was left of him. The sight that greeted Sarah was enough to make her stomach churn with revulsion. Mr. Johnson lay sprawled on the floor, his body twisted and contorted in a grotesque parody of human form. His skin was pale and waxy, his eyes vacant and lifeless, as though whatever spark of humanity had once inhabited him had long since fled. But it was the sight of his face that filled Sarah with horror. It was contorted into a rictus of agony, his mouth frozen in a silent scream of pain and terror. And as she looked closer, Sarah saw the unmistakable signs of violence, deep gashes and bruises that marred his flesh, evidence of a struggle that had ended in tragedy. Gagging, Sarah stumbled backward, her mind reeling with shock and disbelief. What had happened here? What had driven Mr. Johnson to such a grisly fate? As she searched the room for answers, her gaze fell upon a pile of shredded papers strewn across the floor, a jumbled mess of words and images that seemed to hold the key to the mystery. With trembling hands, Sarah began to piece together the fragments, her heart pounding in her chest with anticipation. And then, as she read the words scrawled across the torn pages, a sickening realization dawned upon her. Mr. Johnson had been conducting experiments, twisted, unholy experiments that defied all laws of nature and morality. He had been tampering with forces beyond his understanding, summoning dark entities from the depths of the unknown in a desperate bid for power and control. And in the end, it had cost him everything: his sanity, his humanity, his very soul. With a shudder, Sarah realized that she had stumbled upon something far more sinister than she could have ever imagined. And as she looked around at the decaying remnants of Mr. Johnson's failed experiments, she knew that she had to act fast before the darkness consumed her too. With a newfound sense of urgency, Sarah gathered her strength and resolved to put an end to the nightmare that had plagued her neighborhood for far too long. She would confront the darkness head-on, no matter the cost, and ensure that Mr. Johnson's twisted legacy would never again darken the lives of innocent people. But as she made her way toward the exit, a sudden noise from the shadows made her freeze in her tracks. With a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach, Sarah turned to see a pair of glowing eyes staring back at her from the darkness, a sinister presence lurking just out of sight. With a primal scream, Sarah turned and ran, her heart pounding in her chest as she fled from the house of horrors that had become her prison. She could hear the sound of pursuit echoing in her ears, the creature's unearthly howls growing louder with each passing moment. But she refused to give up. She refused to let the darkness win. With every ounce of strength she had left, Sarah pushed herself onward, her lungs burning with exertion as she raced toward the safety of the outside world. And then, just when she thought she could run no further, she burst through the doorway and into the blinding light of day, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she collapsed onto the ground in exhaustion. As she lay there, gasping for air, Sarah realized with a sense of profound relief that she had made it. She had survived the horrors of the back rooms, had faced the darkness, and emerged victorious. But as she looked back at the house looming ominously in the distance, she knew that the nightmare was far from over. The darkness still lurked within, waiting for its next unsuspecting victim to fall prey to its insidious grasp. But for now, at least, Sarah was safe. And as she picked herself up off the ground and began to make her way home, she vowed to never forget the horrors she had witnessed, and to never stop fighting against the darkness that threatened to consume her world.